My mom's friend is a woman who lives in South Korea. This happened 10 years ago. She lived with her husband and her young daughter in an apartment building in Seoul. At the time, her husband was always working during the day, and her daughter was very young, so she was a stay-at-home mom. One day, the woman went out to run some errands, and she took her daughter with her. When they came back, they stood in the lobby of the apartment building and pressed the button for the elevator. When it arrived and the doors opened, she saw that there was a man already in the elevator. He was wearing a yellow raincoat, and he also had a yellow hat on his head. The woman got onto the elevator with her daughter, and she pressed the button for her floor. Something about the man made her feel uneasy. He never looked up at her. He just kept staring at the floor. It was as if he was keeping his head down so she couldn't really see his face. As the doors closed and the elevator began to descend, the woman glanced at the man out of the corner of her eye. She noticed that he was carrying something close to his side, something that was wrapped in a newspaper. The man was making her nervous. Something about him just wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. She made her daughter stand on the other side of her. She didn't know why, but she wanted to place herself between the man and her daughter. There was an uncomfortable silence as the elevator slowly went up, floor by floor. The woman glanced at the elevator buttons and noticed that only one button was lit up. It was a button for her floor. None of the other numbers had been pressed. Things started to click in her head. That's when she realized what it was about the man that was making her so nervous. He was wearing a raincoat, but it wasn't raining outside. The sun had been shining all day. The woman started to panic. She took out her cell phone, and even though her husband was at work, she pretended she was calling him. She started saying things like, "I'm on the elevator floor, about to get off. Can you open the front door for me?" Making it seem like her husband was waiting at home for her. When the elevator reached her floor and the doors opened, she quickly grabbed her daughter by the hand and got off. She started walking as fast as she could down the hallway to her apartment. Glancing back, she noticed that the man had also gotten off the elevator on the floor and was slowly following her down the hallway. When she got to her apartment, she started banging on the door loudly, saying, "Hey, I'm home, open the door." She even tried to make it seem as if her husband was coming to answer the door. When the man in the yellow raincoat saw this, he stopped in his tracks, turned around, and started to walk back towards the elevator. She watched him until he got back on the elevator. Then she breathed a sigh of relief. She started to punch in the key code to open her door, but her hands were shaking so much she kept hitting the wrong numbers. Each time she pressed the button, it made a beeping sound. To her horror, she realized that the elevator doors hadn't closed. The man in the yellow raincoat was still there. He could hear the beeps. That meant he knew that no one was going to answer the door for her. She saw him get off the elevator and come running down the hallway towards her. The woman let out a scream. She tried one more time and managed to punch in the correct key code. The door opened as she pushed her daughter inside. She jumped through the doorway, herself, and when she turned around, she saw the man in the yellow raincoat was right behind her. She managed to slam the door in his face before he could wedge his hand into the doorway to block her. Her heart was pumping through her chest as she quickly locked the front door and peered through the peephole. She saw the man in the yellow raincoat was standing at the door with a knife in his hand. As he watched, he stood there for a moment, then calmly turned and walked back towards the elevator. It was the middle of the night, and I was in the bedroom, trying to relax. I changed the channel on the TV and saw that the local news was on. At the bottom of the screen, there was a breaking news alert. Murder on the loose, hiding in the vicinity. Police warning, everyone to be on alert. Suspect is armed and dangerous. I was just drifting off to sleep when I was awakened by a strange noise downstairs. It sounded like someone was in the house. At that moment, my heart began beating fast, and I broke into a cold sweat. Straining my ears to listen, I thought I heard another noise. It was the sound of the door creaking. It wasn't my imagination. There was an intruder in the house. I have to get out here fast, I thought. I slipped out the bed quietly as possible and crept towards the window. My body was shaking with fear, and I was hoping I didn't make a noise. Just then, I heard faint footsteps making their way up the stairs. It sounded like more than one person. At any second, they'd burst through that door. I had to get away. I climbed out the window and onto the garage roof, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. At the edge of the roof, I grabbed the drain pipe and lowered myself down until I got into the garden. As I paused, I looked up at the window. I just escaped, and I saw the lights go on. Whew, that was close, I thought. A chill ran down my spine as I thought about what would have happened if they caught me. I made my way down the bottom of the garden and into the woods. Once I was safely hidden by the trees, I broke into a run. I pushed onwards, stumbling through the darkness, moving through the undergrowth, until I came across another housing estate. Clutching my knife, I headed towards another house. High beams. As the woman drove down a deserted highway, she noticed a lone pair of headlights quickly approaching her from the car behind. When the car came closer, she noticed that it was going to overtake her. The car drew up beside her, but then the driver suddenly swerved back behind her car. She started getting nervous and kept an eye on the strange car in the rear-view mirror. He pulled up dangerously close to her rear bumper and began flashing his high beams at her. The headlights dimmed for a moment, but then the high beams flashed again, and the car behind her surged forward. The car followed her very closely, and on tight curves or over hills, he would flash his high beams on and off. The frightening woman struggled to keep her eyes on the road, and fought the urge to keep looking at the car behind her. Finally, she approached her exit, but the car continued to follow, flashing the high beams again and again. The terrified woman took out her mobile phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, the woman screamed into her phone, "A car's following me. He keeps tailgating and blinking his lights at me." The woman gave her address, and in a few minutes she saw red and blue lights of police cars in the distance. She breathed a sigh of relief and pulled into her driveway, but suddenly the strange car pulled into the driveway behind her and began blinking its lights on and off like a maniac. The police car screeched to a halt on the woman's front lawn, and 2 police officers jumped out with their guns drawn. They pulled the man out of the strange car and forced him to lie on the ground on the lawn. They then handcuffed him, and as he screamed, "There's someone in the car! There's someone in the car!" The 2 policemen suddenly pointed their guns at the woman's direction and fired. The woman screamed, but when she turned around, she saw the bloody corpse of a murderer fall out of her back seat. There was a large butcher knife still clasped in his hand. The police searched his back seat and found duct tape, a blindfold, and a pair of handcuffs lying there. The woman realized that the man in the strange car had been trying to save her. When the police released him, he explained that as he pulled up behind her car, his headlights lit up her back seat, and he had seen a man with a butcher knife rising up behind her. Just as the madman was about to stab her, he flashed his high beams, and the figure crouched back down. "I flashed my high beams every time I saw him raise the knife," he said. Babysitter. There was a young girl who was in need of a job and was able to find work as a babysitter for a couple who lived in a large, isolated, old house. They were going out to see a movie that night and left the teenage babysitter in charge of the 3 young children. The babysitter put the children to bed when it got late and then went downstairs to watch some television. She was just getting comfortable when she heard the phone ringing. When she answered it, all she heard was heavy breathing, followed by a man's voice asking, "Have you checked on the children?" Freaking out, she hung up the phone, trying to convince herself that it was just someone playing a practical joke on her. She went back to watching television, but about 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. She picked up the receiver and heard a hysterical laugh from the other end of the line. Then the same voice asked, "Why haven't you checked on the children?" The babysitter slammed on the phone. The poor girl was frightened out of her wits and immediately called the police. The operator at the police station told the babysitter that if the man called again, she should try keep talking to him. That would give the police time to trace the call. A few minutes later, the phone rang a 3rd time, and when the babysitter answered it, she heard heavy breathing again. The voice on the line said, "You should really check on the children." The babysitter listened to him laughing hysterically for a long time. She hung up the phone again, and almost immediately it rang again. This time, it was the operator from the police station who yelled, "Get out of the house right now." The calls were coming from the upstairs phone. The babysitter dropped the phone in shock, and suddenly she heard heavy footsteps walking down the stairs. Without pausing for a second, she ran out of the house as fast as her legs would carry her. Just as she closed the front door behind her, a man's hand slammed against the glass. She screamed and ran onto the street just as a police car was pulling up outside. The police searched the house and found the 2 children upstairs, hiding in a closet, crying uncontrollably. In the parents' bedroom, they found a bloody axe lying on the floor next to the upstairs phone. The back window was wide open, and the curtains were blowing in the breeze. There was no sign of the madman who had been making the phone calls. He had escaped into the night when the police arrived and managed to interrupt this horrible plan to kill the 2 children and the poor babysitter.